The studio lights dimmed, casting long shadows across the stage as the audience settled into silence. Cameras panned slowly, anticipation thick in the air. Then, without warning, Hakeem Jeffries leaned into the microphone, his tone sharpened. Like a blade, with a smug half-smile, he declared, "Maybe some people in this room should remember their place before speaking above their rank." Gasps rippled through the audience. The words hung heavy, laced with condescension, cutting deeper than the casual jab they pretended to be. Some in the crowd chuckled nervously. Others exchanged wide-eyed looks, stunned by the audacity. It wasn't just a remark, it was a dismissal. A public attempt to shrink another voice into silence. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The crackle of disbelief buzzed louder than any applause could. You could see it in the faces: discomfort, anger, shock, all colliding in a live moment too raw to be ignored. Jeffries leaned back in his chair, satisfied, convinced he had seized control of the stage. His confidence bordered on arrogance, and for a moment, it seemed the crowd might allow it. But then the cameras caught Jasmine Crockett. Sitting poised, her eyes burned with resolve. She didn't flinch, didn't shrink, didn't give him the satisfaction of a retreat. Her silence was louder than any rebuttal yet. Storm waiting for release. The audience leaned forward again, sensing the shift. This wasn't over. Something electric was about to spark. Something no one, least of all Jeffries, was prepared for. And as the tension tightened like a wire ready to snap, one truth became undeniable. No one expected what Jasmine Crockett would do next for years. Hakeem Jeffries had carried himself as if he were beyond reproach, an untouchable figure in the political arena. With polished rhetoric and a reputation for dominance in debates, he projected an image of authority few dared to challenge. Too many sparring with him on live television was like stepping into the ring with a heavyweight champion. The outcome already decided, and that's what made this showdown so electrifying. On one side was Jeffries, the seasoned power broker, cloaked in confidence and backed by the weight of his name. On the other sat Jasmine Crockett, often underestimated, often dismissed, a voice some thought too unseasoned to hold ground against the establishment. To critics, she was an underdog. To supporters, she was a rising force. Deny the imbalance on stage. Power versus principle. Arrogance versus dignity. The tension wasn't just about two people trading words. It was about something larger: what happens when those who have been told to stay quiet finally decide to speak. Every camera angle, every microphone, every eye in that studio became part of the battleground. The crowd sensed it. This was more than a debate. It was a test of will, a confrontation between entitlement and authenticity. Jeffries' smirk had signaled that he expected an easy victory, another notch in his belt of rhetorical conquests. But what he hadn't accounted for was the quiet storm building beside him. Crockett wasn't there to play by his rules. And the dignity with which she absorbed his jab only magnified the suspense. The audience shifted restlessly, caught between admiration for Jeffries' polished bravado and unease at his blatant attempt to belittle. They didn't yet know it, but they were on the edge of witnessing a reversal so powerful it would echo far beyond the studio walls. Because this wasn't just another political exchange. This was about to become the moment people would replay. For years, one clip that would redefine reputations, spark headlines, and remind everyone that even giants can fall. And all it would take was Jasmine Crockett's next move. Asterisk Section 3. Antagonist backstory: Jeffries, 600 words. Hakeem Jeffries built his political persona like a master architect designs a fortress, every stone carefully placed, every facade polished to gleam in the spotlight. From the earliest days of his career, he understood the theater of politics, how a steady tone and a sharp tongue could command a room. He rose quickly, becoming the kind of figure who seemed untouchable in debate halls and on Sunday morning. Talk shows, his presence carried weight. His words landed with precision. To allies, he was a disciplined strategist. To rivals, he was a formidable wall of rhetoric that few could scale. The cameras loved him. He knew exactly when to pause, when to smile, when to drive a point home with the gravity of a seasoned statesman. His reputation wasn't just earned, it was cultivated. Every appearance reinforced the image of a man in total control, a man who could dismantle opponents with one cutting line. And the public bought into it. Many began to see Jeffries as a symbol of intellectual dominance. Someone who didn't just win arguments, but left his challengers looking small in the process. But behind the polished veneer, there were cracks subtle, yet telling. His dominance often blurred into arrogance, his confidence into dismissal. Colleagues whispered that Jeffries had little patience for voices he deemed beneath him. He could tolerate applause but had no taste for dissent. Those who entered the ring against him weren't simply opponents. In his eyes they were nuisances, reminders that his throne had to be defended. The truth was, Jeffries wasn't just used to winning, he was addicted to it. Every debate where he outshone an adversary reinforced a belief that no one could truly challenge him. It made him sharper, yes, but also careless. He began to underestimate those across from him, assuming that his polish alone would be enough to silence them. When he laughed off criticism, it wasn't strategy, it was instinct. When he mocked, it wasn't wit, it was habit, and habits have consequences. Over time, his dismissiveness created enemies not only outside his circle, but also within. Supporters admired his strength, but they also wondered, was this strength rooted in substance, or was it a performance polished to perfection? His control over the stage was undeniable, but beneath the surface, his refusal to take challengers seriously became a blind spot. Still, Jeffries carried himself like a man immune to downfall. Each debate, each interview seemed to reaffirm the myth: Hakeem Jeffries could not be touched. His voice was too sharp, his presence too commanding, his mastery too complete. When the lights of the studio came up on this particular night, he walked onto that stage with the same aura he had worn for years, the aura of inevitability. The crowd saw it. The moderators saw it. Even Jasmine Crockett, sitting across from him, could feel the weight of it. The Jeffries mystique filled the room as if his dominance were already written into the script. He smirked, confident that this too would be another effortless victory, another moment where his opponent would crumble under the pressure of his polished command. But arrogance has a way of turning strength into weakness. For all his preparation, for all his cultivated power, Jeffries failed to see the danger in underestimating someone with both truth and dignity on their side. He had weathered storms before, but never one like this, because on this night, in this arena, Hakeem Jeffries' greatest weapon, his confidence, was about to become his greatest weakness. Asterisk Section 4. Protagonist backstory: Crockett, 700 words. Jasmine Crockett's story doesn't begin under the bright lights of a television studio or behind the polished desk of political power. It begins in the margins, in the overlooked corners, where ordinary people fight battles no camera ever records. She was never handed authority. She had to carve it out with grit, persistence, and a fire that burned brighter with every setback she faced. Crockett grew up knowing the weight of struggle. She saw firsthand how systems often ignored those without wealth, influence, or connections. That reality didn't make her bitter. It made her sharper, hungrier, more determined to give a voice to those who lived unheard. Unlike polished politicians who rehearsed their every move, Crockett's strength came from raw authenticity. What she said came from the heart, not a script. People felt it. Long before she became a name recognized on live TV, Crockett was the kind of advocate who would stand up when everyone else stayed seated. In classrooms, she challenged assumptions. In courtrooms, she defended the defenseless. And in communities, she became a relentless presence, someone unwilling to walk away when dignity was on the line. Every setback, every dismissal she faced, from those in power, didn't silence hurt, trained her. It was resistance that became her schooling, criticism that became her fuel. What made Crockett different wasn't just her voice. It was the sacrifices behind it. She wasn't the product of privilege, and she didn't pretend to be. Her journey was marked by late nights of study, days of scraping by, and years of being told she wasn't ready, wasn't polished, wasn't enough. Each of those moments cut deep, but instead of weakening her, they formed armor. She learned to take dismissiveness and turn it into resolve. She learned to take exclusion and turn it into belonging. not just for herself, but for everyone she spoke for, in debates. Crockett carried a rare energy. It wasn't about rehearsed lines or staged confidence. It was about conviction. She spoke like someone who had lived what she defended. She debated like someone who had nothing to lose, but everything to fight for. Her fire wasn't for show, it was survival transformed into strength. And that's what made her so dangerous to the polished, untouchable figures like Hakeem Jeffries. Where they relied on power and perception, she relied on truth. Where they cultivated images, she embodied experience. Yet, despite all she had built, Crockett was still underestimated.
That was her paradox.
Her authenticity drew respect, but her opponents often dismissed her because she didn't play their game. They mistook her passion for lack of discipline, her unpolished edges for weakness. They didn't realize that what looked unrefined was in fact the sharpest kind of strength the kind. Born in the crucible of real struggle, and this is where the power imbalance sharpened the stakes. Jeffries represented the establishment, the towering figure with the gleaming reputation. Crockett was the underdog, the one many assumed would crumble under his presence. But beneath the surface, the truth was clearer. Crockett had been preparing for battles like this her entire life. Every dismissal, every arrogant laugh, every door slammed in her face had been rehearsal for this moment. She didn't need polish. She had purpose. She didn't need perfection. She had fire. Her supporters knew it. They saw in her a reflection of their own resilience. She wasn't a distant figure. They could feel her humanity, her sincerity. To them, Crockett wasn't just another politician or debater. She was proof that the unheard could no longer be silenced. So when she sat across from Jeffries that night, under the bright studio lights, she wasn't just another opponent in his long list of debates. She was the culmination of years of resistance, the embodiment of struggle turned into strength. Her gaze wasn't one of intimidation, but of clarity, because unlike Jeffries, she didn't see this as performance. She saw it as truth against arrogance, dignity against dismissal. The stage was set. Jeffries smirked with the certainty of a man who believed he couldn't be touched. But Crockett leaned forward, with the quiet fire of someone who had been touched by life in ways Jeffries could never understand. She wasn't playing his game, she was rewriting it. Everything in her life had prepared her for this moment, though. She didn't know it yet. The lights burned hotter as the exchange deepened. What began as a routine clash of ideas quickly turned into something more, an arena where dominance was being tested, blow by blow. Jeffries, polished as ever, leaned into his familiar rhythm. He wielded statistics like weapons, his voice rolling with the confidence of a man who had faced and defeated countless challengers. Each statement dripped with certainty. His smile, sharp with the arrogance of someone convinced the outcome was predetermined. But Crockett didn't shrink. She absorbed his words, nodding at times, her expression steady. Where Jeffries projected dominance, she carried composure. She let the weight of his arrogance hang in the air before cutting through it with calm, razor-sharp rebuttals. Each time he tried to box her in, she slipped free not by matching his performance, but by grounding herself in authenticity. Numbers can tell a story, she said, her voice firm but even, but they can also hide the people those stories leave behind. You speak of percentages, but I speak of lives, real families, real pain. That's the difference between your politics and my reality. The audience stirred. A murmur rippled across the room, a signal that something was shifting. Jeffries caught it too, and for the first time, a faint edge of irritation crept into his carefully controlled tone. He pressed harder, doubling down, his words sharper now. His body leaning forward as if proximity alone could overpower her. You can't lead with anecdotes, he shot back, the condescension coating his every syllable. Leadership requires discipline, strategy, and authority. Not fiery speeches that sound good in the moment. Gasps scattered through the crowd. The dismissiveness was palpable. A dismissal not only of Crockett, but of everyone who saw themselves in her struggle. Yet Crockett didn't flinch. She straightened in her chair, eyes unwavering, her response measured but loaded with rising intensity. Authority isn't granted by a title, she answered, her voice cutting clear and unshaken. "It's earned by listening to the people who put you there. Strategy without humanity is just control. And if all you see in truth-telling is a fiery speech, maybe that says more about how out of touch you are than about me." The studio fell into a taut silence, broken only by a sudden burst of applause. The crowd wasn't just watching anymore. They were reacting, feeling, choosing. Jeffries' smirk faltered, his jaw tightening as he realized the energy in the room was slipping. Away from him, he tried again, louder this time, layering authority over irritation. Crockett's answers grew sharper, not through volume but through precision. Each exchange escalated, the tension tightening like a rope pulled from both ends. What had started as a debate was now a battle of presence, pride, and dignity. The air thickened. The audience leaned forward, breaths held, waiting for the next strike. And just when it seemed the exchange had reached its peak, Jeffries reached for one more line, one more attempt to reassert dominance. Then came the breaking point. The line no one could walk back. The moment arrived like a storm front, silent, heavy, electric. Jeffries leaned in, voice sharpened with frustration. His words carrying that final jab meant to cut Crockett down once and for all. "Passion doesn't make policy," he declared, his tone dismissive, the smirk tugging back at his lips. "You're here for the show? I'm here for results." The crowd gasped. It was the kind of comment designed to end a debate, the verbal equivalent of a hammer striking the table. But in that instant, Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't shrink. Instead, she let the silence linger. A pause so deliberate it shifted the atmosphere entirely. Her eyes locked on him. Her posture, straight and commanding, carried the weight of someone who had lived the realities he so casually dismissed. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, deliberate yet ringing with unshakable conviction. "Results?" she repeated, drawing the word out, as though tasting the hollowness in his claim. "You speak of results like they belong to you alone. But tell me, Congressman, what result is it when entire communities are still crying out for clean water? What result is it when mothers work 2 jobs and still can't afford childcare? What result is it when people are begging to be heard and their so-called leaders dismiss their voices as a show?" The crowd stirred again, louder now. Murmurs, nods, a few claps breaking through. Crockett didn't stop. She leaned forward, slightly, her tone sharpening. "You talk about policy as if it's written in marble, untouchable, untarnished. But policy without empathy is nothing more than paperwork. Leadership without listening is nothing more than arrogance. And let me tell you something, passion isn't a weakness. It's the fire that makes change possible. It's the force that built every movement in history that you now stand on." Applause erupted. A wave of energy shot across the room, and for the first time, Jeffries' polished facade began to crack. His jaw tensed. His eyes darted, searching for footing in ground that had suddenly shifted beneath him. Crockett pressed forward. She didn't just counter his words, she dismantled the very foundation of his authority. "Say you're here for results? Then where were those results when young men were being funneled into prisons instead of colleges? Where were those results when corporate money drowned out the cries of working families? Where were those results when you dismissed grassroots organizers, people like me, because we weren't part of your polished club?" The studio roared. Some clapped, some whistled. A chant began to swell, half the audience repeating her name. "Crockett, Crockett," while others pounded the floor with their feet. It wasn't just debate anymore. It was theater, spectacle, revolution, condensed into a single exchange. On social media, hashtags lit up instantly. Hashtag Crockett clap back, hashtag mic drop moment, hashtag exposed. Clips were already being shared, her fiery one-liners sliced into viral-ready sound bites. Before the debate had even ended, Jeffries shifted in his chair, his polished smile replaced with tight lips, his practiced composure giving way to visible discomfort. He raised his hand as if to interrupt, but Crockett's voice rose above his attempt, each word landing like a blow. "You call my truth a performance? No. What you just witnessed is reality. And if reality feels like a performance to you, maybe That's because you've been living too long in the comfort of your bubble while the rest of us fight just to breathe. The crowd exploded. Gasps, cheers, standing applause. A cameraman instinctively zoomed in on Jeffries' face, the beads of sweat forming at his temple, the faltering in his eyes. This was no longer the image of the untouchable statesman. This was the unraveling of a man unprepared for the rawness of authenticity. Crockett slowed now, her tone softer but more cutting than ever, the kind of quiet that forced the room to lean in. You see, I wasn't supposed to make it here. I wasn't supposed to sit across from you on this stage. By your standards, people like truth tellers, fighters, outsiders were supposed to fade into the background while you recite your polished lines. But here's the truth. Everything I've endured, every sacrifice I've made, every voice I've carried with me, it's all led to this. And it's bigger than you. It's bigger than me. It's about the people who refuse to be dismissed. One more time. She paused. The silence was deafening, yet loaded. Then she leaned into the mic, her final words like a hammer shattering glass. So if you want to call me passionate, if you want to call me fiery, do it. Because passion is exactly what will outlast the empty promises of politicians who think they can't be touched. And tonight, Congressman, you learned just how wrong. The eruption was immediate, seismic. Applause thundered through the studio. People rose to their feet. Some had tears in their eyes. Others shouted in agreement. Hashtags surged into trending lists across the country. The control Jeffries had once wielded so effortlessly was gone dismantled in front of millions. The cameras captured him sitting rigidly, his hands clenched, his face betraying the defeat he couldn't mask. Confidence cracked, authority exposed. By the time she finished, Jeffries wasn't just defeated. The moment the debate ended, the shockwaves began. Clips of Jasmine Crockett's fiery takedown didn't just circulate, they detonated across the internet like a cultural earthquake. Within minutes, hashtags like hashtag Crockett clap back and hashtag Jeffries exposed were trending at the very top of Twitter. The 30-second highlight where she paused, locked eyes with Jeffries, and delivered the line that silenced him was looped endlessly, dissected frame by millions who couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. Memes poured in at a breakneck pace. One showed Jeffries' stunned face superimposed on a sinking ship. Another framed Crockett as a superhero, cape flowing, microphone in hand like a sword. TikTok creators synced her mic drop to dramatic soundtracks, from thunderclaps to orchestra, crescendos. Each remix carried the same underlying message. The underdog had risen, and the so-called untouchable had been dethroned. Commentators scrambled to keep up. Progressive outlets hailed the exchange as a watershed moment in political courage. Late-night talk shows replayed Crockett's words, splicing them with laugh tracks whenever Jeffries' rebuttals fell flat. Even typically cautious networks couldn't ignore the viral tide-running segments on the debate that shook Washington's pecking order. What stunned them most wasn't just Crockett's ferocity, but how effortlessly she reframed the conversation, truth and dignity against smug arrogance. Supporters across the country lit up social media with messages of pride and relief. Finally, someone said what we've all been feeling, wrote one user. Their posts shared tens of thousands of times. Celebrities chimed in, 2 actors, musicians, even athletes, praising Crockett for showing real backbone. Grassroots activists saw in her a reflection of their own struggles, declaring that her stand gave them new energy to fight their own battles. But it wasn't only celebration. Critics, stunned and scrambling, tried to dismiss the clash as a fluke, a moment of overheated rhetoric, yet their defenses only underscored the undeniable truth. The balance of power had shifted before their eyes. The spectacle had pierced through the noise of politics as usual, igniting conversations in workplaces, living rooms, and classrooms. This wasn't just a viral clip, it was a cultural touchstone. People weren't just laughing at memes. We're talking about dignity, respect, and the courage it takes to confront those who believe themselves untouchable. Crockett's stand wasn't only hers anymore, it belonged to everyone who had ever been underestimated, dismissed, or spoken over. But beyond the memes, something deeper was happening across America. The days that followed, as the noise of memes, hashtags, and hot takes began to settle. What lingered wasn't just the entertainment value of a heated political showdown. It was the moral clarity that Jasmine Crockett had carved out in real time. Where Jeffries had relied on performance, polish, and the armor of arrogance, Crockett had countered with something far rarer: authenticity. Her words reminded people that politics isn't just about who can dominate the stage, but about whose voice rings with truth. She showed that dignity is stronger than arrogance, and truth is heavier than performance. For every smug smirk Jeffries had delivered, Crockett answered with composure. For every attempt to dismiss her, she responded with conviction that cut deeper than rehearsed one-liners ever could. The moral was plain for anyone watching closely. Strength doesn't come from belittling others. It comes from standing firmly in your own truth. Crockett reframed the entire encounter by refusing to play Jeffries' game. Instead of chasing applause lines, she embodied the very values the audience longed to encourage: respect and authenticity. What made her stand unforgettable was not just the words she spoke, but the posture she held. She represented the resilience of those who are constantly underestimated, the ones expected to bow, falter, or fade when challenged. But instead of shrinking, she expanded. Instead of retreating, she advanced. She became a mirror for millions of ordinary people watching at home, people who had felt overlooked, talked down to, or dismissed in their own lives. The resolution of this clash was not simply that Crockett won the debate. It was that she reminded the nation of a timeless truth: power without humility collapses under its own weight, while authenticity, even when underestimated, endures. Viewers walked away with more than a viral clip. They walked away with a message: never underestimate the power of authenticity. In a world obsessed with spectacle, Crockett had proven that sincerity still matters. In a culture where arrogance often masquerades as strength, she had redefined what true strength looks like. This wasn't just about Crockett versus Jeffries. It was about us, the people watching, the voices that refuse to be silenced, the ordinary citizens who see themselves in the underdog and find hope when truth prevails over arrogance. And perhaps that is why this night would be remembered, replayed, and retold for years to come. Not simply because one politician humbled another, but because Jasmine Crockett reminded us all that dignity is undefeated when we dare to stand in it. Asterisk. So yes, Jasmine Crockett destroyed Hakeem Jeffries on live TV, but let's be clear. What she really did was give America a reminder that arrogance always cracks under the weight of truth, a reminder that dignity, when wielded with courage, speaks louder than the loudest performance. This wasn't just a political takedown, it was a moment of clarity. It showed us that the underdog doesn't just belong in the fight, they can define it. Crockett didn't just win the debate. She won the hearts of people who are tired of being dismissed, tired of arrogance masquerading as leadership, and ready to see authenticity shine. And that's the real story. Not just a clash of personalities, but a lesson in resilience, authenticity, and the quiet power of dignity. So now it's over to you. What did you think of this showdown? Did Crockett expose something bigger than Jeffries himself? Drop your thoughts in the comments side. Love to hear your take. If you found this breakdown powerful, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss the moments that shape our politics and culture. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that arrogance never wins in the end. Because in times of arrogance, dignity speaks louder.